Majestic Mount Everest, the planet's highest peak. More than 170 people are known to have been killed trying to conquer it. 120 of them are still buried there somewhere in the snow, and they will be, most likely, for eternity. This is the story of the dark side of Mount Everest, and the deadliest of all times on the mountain, May 1996.
We wanted to know who's dead, who's alive, where are they, who can be saved.
A socialite, a mountaineer, a doctor, and dozens more, all trapped in a violent storm.
From then on, the nightmare just intensified.
It was easier to go ahead and try and die instead of stay alive.
Rare scenes and recordings of the heart-reaching phone calls to the top of the world.
Only take what you need, Rod, and start moving.
He told me on the final phone call not to worry about him too much.
From the battle to bring them back alive.
At those elevations, you might as well be trying to rescue the people in Apollo 13.
Did you know what it meant to put a helicopter up that high?
Not a clue. Not even a clue.
To the inspiring story of how one man, left to die, somehow saved himself.
I could, sit there and see my family in front of me, and I wasn't going to give up.
Hello, I'm Forrest Sawyer. Mount Everest used to be the domain of only the best climbers in the world. But in the mid-'80s, conquering Everest became a status symbol. Wealthy climbers who could never have made it on their own began paying veteran guides to lead them to the top. And once money came to the mountain, tragedy was waiting to happen. Everest has been killing people since they first started climbing it, mostly as they come up the southern approach from the Nepal side. 1922, 7 climbers killed in an avalanche, the first recorded deaths. 1970, 6 more killed at the deadly Khumbu icefall. 1974, 5 more killed in yet another avalanche. And the deadliest incident of all, May 1996, up near the summit, 8 climbers killed after being caught in a sudden spring storm. The tragedy in May 1996 started peacefully, as all Mount Everest climbs do, with a compulsion to be one of the relatively few human beings to climb the tallest mountain in the world. It was their life's dream to stand just for a moment on the very top of the world. The adventure began here. Kathmandu, Nepal, a mecca for Westerners seeking the spiritual and the exotic. They came with ambition and enough money, as much as $65,000 each, to buy professional guides, some native Sherpas to carry their gear, and a chance to conquer Everest. Now they begin a long trek up and into the Himalayas.
Yeah, it's to be hanging out in the most beautiful mountains in the world it's a dream come true.
Scott Fisher from Seattle, one of the world's best-known professional guides. This year, Fisher decided he was ready to lead his first commercial expedition to Everest. Fisher was known for his freewheeling style, a kind of mountain climbing rock and roll summed up by his company's name, Mountain Madness.
Scott! Thank you.
Fisher's team of 3 guides and 8 paying clients set out on the 1st of April, keeping a video record of their 10-day trek to Everest's base camp. It is a relaxed time, when the climber's only job is to adjust to the altitude and to each other.
A little hike today, acclimatization.
Acclimatization is a process of the body adapting to the low oxygen in the air and in the blood. The only way to acclimatize for an Everest climber is really to get to Nepal or Tibet, get up to base camp, and spend weeks there acclimatizing to the 18,000-foot level before going higher.
Everybody is full of anticipation and excitement. You're seeing this different land. You're getting deeper and deeper into the high mountains. And the whole way in, that thing looks big and bigger.
Yeah. You are so cute.
Don't be fooled by the high spirits. Scott Fisher knows all too well how risky this climb can be. Everest has already claimed 133 climbers' lives. Most died on the way down.
The mountain's always going to win. Most of the deaths are happening when people push themselves to the summit. They don't quite get back down. You're not going to get asked to go on another climb ever again if you're dead. So it doesn't count if you touch the top and can't make it back down.
No one knows that better than Fisher's friend and rival on the mountain, Rob Hall of New Zealand. Hall is a legendary guide who has already taken 39 paying clients to the top of the world, and he's leading a team again this year.
Here's our fearless leader, Rob Hall. Notice the gloves on our fearless leader. Can't, yes, that's right.
These hands must guide to the summit. He's one of those guys, you walk up to him and you like him the instant you meet him.
50-year-old Dallas physician Beck Weathers spent years preparing for his chance at Everest. He decided Rob Hall was the man to get him there.
You know pretty much right off the bat that this guy really knows what he's doing, and he makes it clear right from the start that his primary goal really is not to get you on top of the mountain, it's to get you back alive.
Back in Dallas, Beck's wife, Peach, was often left alone with their 2 children, while her husband pursued his dreams.
It was something he had to do, and I recognized his obsession.
Did you understand this obsession?
No.
It was just something that was completely outside
I knew
your
he
camp.
had to do it, but it was totally outside my personality.
Did you feel a little resentful?
Yes, absolutely. He knew I didn't want him to go.
No, when you get involved with a man who has those kinds of dreams, you have to take them as a package, and if you want to change them, then you shouldn't marry them.
Rob Hall's wife, Dr. Jan Arnold, understood her husband's obsession. As an experienced climber herself, she also understood the risks.
So you accept the risk, prepare as you can, and then you sort of forget about it for most of the time.
Until you can't forget about it.
Are you freezing now? You're okay now? You're freezing?
In 1993, Rob Hall's climbing partner, Gary Ball, came down with altitude sickness and was flown to safety in Hall's arms.
There's 2 very serious types of altitude illness. One is pulmonary edema, where air sacs are filled with fluid and not air. No oxygen can get into the blood. The other problem is the high-altitude cerebral edema, where the capillaries in the brain leak fluid, and that's why climbers die.
The next year, Gary Ball came down with altitude sickness again, but there was no rescue, and Hall had to bury his friend. Perhaps because of those experiences, Rob Hall's style was cautious, by the book.
If you're not pushy, you don't have any chance of getting up a big mountain. If you're too pushy, you don't get to come home.
Say hello to the camera, John.
Good morning. Among Rob Hall's 8 clients this year, journalist John Krakauer.
Not much.
He had come to report for Outside Magazine on the growing and controversial popularity of commercial expeditions.
There were a lot of people at base camp who were deluded, who were legends in their own mind, who thought that if only I didn't have to be an accountant or a lawyer or a doctor and have time to climb full time, you know, I can do this stuff. And I was guilty of that too.
Krakauer was not the only one who had come to file reports on this year's climb. In Scott Fisher's team, well-known New York socialite Sandy Pittman, who had set a goal of climbing the highest peaks on all 7 continents, Everest, was to be the last.
Sandy is a very wealthy individual. So when she comes to climb a mountain, she doesn't do it exactly the same way that everybody else does. I know that when we climbed in Antarctica, she brought a bag of gourmet food that would have taken 3 people to lift. And brought a TV with her. And there are not many places you go to climb a mountain and somebody's got, you know, TV with movies you can watch in your tent.
Hi, Sandy. Sandy's communication tent.
This time, Pittman came packing sophisticated satellite equipment. Her reports were filed over the internet as the teams went up the mountain. For the first time, climbing Everest had become a worldwide spectator sport, and Rob Hall and Scott Fisher had the most to gain.
There's a marketing bonanza here, so I think there's more pressure than ever for Rob to get me to the summit and for Scott to get Sandy to the summit.
Everybody's climbed it now, every Tom, Dick, and Harry from every walk of life who has enough money.
Professional climber David Brashears was also headed for Everest, leading a camera team from McGillivray Freeman Films to create the first giant screen movie on Everest. Brashears was worried. All the amateurs on the mountain could make it dangerous for everyone. Climbing Mount Everest is no longer the pioneering venture it was back in the early 20th century, when mountaineers first started climbing it. In 1996, the mountain was crawling with amateurs. By early May, Everest's base camp, set among rock and ice 17,600 feet up, was growing into a small village. Over 300 people, 14 expedition teams, each with kitchens and stereos and satellite phones and fax machines. On May 4th, hoping to avoid a traffic jam up the mountain, expedition leaders met to coordinate their summit attempts.
We are making history and we are setting protocol, so let's take care of our mountain.
There is only a brief 2-week window in May when the ferocious weather is calm enough to give climbers a chance to make it to the top. David Brashears was there, and Scott Fisher, and Rob Hall, already working to make sure discipline would be maintained.
Maybe I'll get unpopular, but somebody has to be unpopular sometimes.
For 4 weeks, the teams had trained, climbing up and down the mountain, back and forth between base camp and camps farther up, Camp 2, Camp 3, and Camp 4, all the time adjusting to the higher altitude and thinner air.
The pressure of total air on Mount Everest is only 1/3 that of sea level. And so there's only about 1/3 as much oxygen in the blood as well. It makes Everest and other 8,000-meter peaks very dangerous from the point of view of the oxygen deprivation.
And the danger starts just 400 yards from base camp, where 19 climbers have died over the years. The Khumbu Icefall.
It's 2,000 feet of blocks of ice the size of huge buildings, separated by crevasses that just go forever. And the whole thing can move up to 30, 40 inches a day, so it's highly unstable. And you always have this concern that as you're standing there, some piece of it's going to come rolling through there and take you out.
Despite their friendly rivalry, Hall and Fisher decided their teams would be safer summiting together. Setting out on May 6th, it took 3 days of climbing to reach a tiny area carved out of a steep slope at nearly 24,000 feet. Camp 3. Then on May 9th, the first omen, a climber from a Taiwanese expedition had taken a bad fall, and his team leader, eager to reach the summit, left him at Camp 3.
That event told me that there was a lot of raw ambition up there and not enough compassion. 4 hours later, they called, he was dead. And that was the beginning for us of this whole tragedy.
The teams of Scott Fisher and Rob Hall press on to the last base, Camp 4, a desolate wind-blown patch of rock littered with hundreds of oxygen bottles from past expeditions. Most climbers must now wear oxygen masks to maintain warmth and strength, and the summit is still a day's climb away. Without extra oxygen, no one can survive here for long.
Above 8,000 meters or 26,000 feet, we use the term the death zone because the oxygen deprivation is so severe that nothing in the body functions very well. It becomes very difficult to remember things. Short-term memory is off. Sometimes speech becomes impaired. Judgment becomes impaired.
The expeditions of Rob Hall and Scott Fisher are now 26,000 feet above sea level, almost 5 miles up in the death zone. It is midnight, May 10th, when Hall and Fisher tell their climbers to put on their oxygen masks and headlamps and head for the summit.
It's cold, it's crisp, the sky is just a blanket of stars, and it really seems like an ideal night.
Dr. Beck Weathers knows they all have to move quickly. Rob Hall had told all his clients, if you stay up here too long, you will die. Reporter John Krakauer remembers the warnings.
He said, I'm going to call the shots on Summit Day. If I say we turn around, we're going to turn around. Some of you are going to argue with me. You're not going to like it. But believe me, I know what's right.
Hall and Fisher wanted their clients at the summit no later than 2 o'clock that afternoon. So they planned to send a Sherpa from each team out early to attach ropes into the rock and ice to help the clients move quickly past the most difficult points.
Rob Hall emphasized, this is the most important thing we do. This has to be done. The year before, ropes weren't fixed ahead of time. It slowed us down. We didn't get to the summit because of it. I'm not going to have that happen again this year.
There was no question.
No question.
The day's mistakes began here. Scott Fisher's Sherpa, a powerful climber named Lobsang, never showed up to attach the ropes, and the second Sherpa refused to work alone. Confused and desperate to keep moving, Fisher's assistant guide, Neil Beitelman, took over the job himself.
The difference between life and death came down to minutes. The ropes weren't fixed. There had to be an explanation.
In fact, there was. Instead of fixing ropes, Fisher's Sherpa, Lobsang, had quietly taken on a different mission.
The first time I saw Lobsang, he's got someone in tow on a 4-foot stretch of rope in a yellow down suit, hauling him like a horse pulling a plow. Lobsang is huffing and puffing, exhausted. The person he's hauling is clearly sort of miserable.
That person was Scott Fisher's high-profile client, the woman who was filing reports on the internet, Sandy Pittman.
For the first 5 or 6 hours of this climb, Sandy was being towed up the mountain. Someone decided she needed to be short-roped to help her get to the top.
Lobsang now says he towed Sandy Pittman because he knew it was what Scott Fisher wanted. In Scott Fisher's mind, how important was it for Sandy Pittman to make it to the top?
Scott was a savvy businessman. It was hugely important. You can't buy that kind of advertising. Sandy is a public figure. You know, she's not a shrinking violet. If she gets to the top, people are going to hear about this.
As each rope is fixed, there are delays. Climbers are waiting. Now, there is a traffic jam at the top of the world.
About halfway up this thing, I realized my vision is going south in a big way.
Far below the traffic jam at the ropes, Beck Weathers finds himself facing a very different problem. He had recently had eye surgery, and the high-altitude pressure is beginning to blind him.
And at this point, I said, this is crazy. One eye is completely blurred over, so I lost all my depth perception, and the other eye is not seeing that great. So I tell Rob Hall.
And Rob says, what? You're not going to go down by yourself. You're going to wait here because I need to know where you are. So Beck says, fair enough. Cross my heart, hope to die. That's what he literally said. I'll wait here until you come back.
Rob Hall goes on up the mountain, leading 3 other clients, including Doug Hansen, a postal worker from Seattle who was a member of Hall's expedition last year, the expedition that failed to reach the summit.
That really broke Rob's heart as well as Doug's. And he said, Doug, come back next year. I guarantee I'll get you to the top. You can do it. I know you can do it.
By 1:25 that afternoon, Neil Beitelman reached the summit, uncertain what he should do. It was Beitelman's boss, Scott Fisher, who was supposed to tell his clients when to head back down. And Fisher was somewhere down the mountain. With precious minutes going by, Beitelman decided to wait.
How long were we there?
I was at the summit for 1 hour and 45 minutes.
That's a long time.
I thought so, yeah.
It is the day's second mistake, and the clients keep coming well into the afternoon and stay to savor their success, forgetting the warnings to turn back by 2 p.m. Charlotte Fox is one of 6 members of Scott Fisher's team to make it to the top.
I didn't even really want to stay up as long as we did, but there was somewhat of a celebration going on, and you hated to blow out the party too early.
Finally, at 3:10, long after the scheduled turnaround time, Beitelman decides on his own to start the clients down, soon passing Scott Fisher, who is weak, but still pressing for the summit.
He wasn't his chipper, strong self at that point, but, you know, who is up there?
Rob Hall, the other team leader, waits on top, well past his deadline, for his last client to arrive, postal worker Doug Hansen. These final delays by the team leaders are the last critical mistakes. As Scott Fisher descends from the summit, his last roll of film shows ominous clouds gathering just below the climbers.
I'm very scared and taking it seriously and want to get down in a hurry. And pretty soon, I descend into the storm.
This building of the clouds starting at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, getting stronger by 3, peaking at 5 or 6. It all happened simultaneously. The whole length of the Himalayas exploded at the same time. That was probably one of the surprises for them.
The wind just comes in like a freight train. I mean, it is really blowing. it's very, very cold. And it turns into a whiteout.
Precipitation would be solid, it would be small hail, so they have this violent up and down draft, plus the horizontal winds, turbulent, visibility very poor.
You can't really tell where the ridge ends and the cloud begins. It'd be very easy to just walk off this ridge, fall thousands of feet. Come down, what the hell are you doing here, Beck?
True to his promise, Beck had stayed right where Rob Hall had left him, unaware that Hall was still at the summit with client Doug Hansen, who had now collapsed from exhaustion.
Very soon after that, we have the first radio call from just below the summit, Rob asking for help, saying, Doug and I have run out of oxygen. Doug's in trouble. We need help.
To make it worse, Scott Fisher, who has been fatigued and climbing slowly all day, is also near collapse. At base camp, growing concern.
We're 5,000 feet away. 5,000 feet away on Everest at those elevations. You might as well be trying to rescue the people in Apollo 13.
Near the summit, Doug Hansen is too tired to move, and Rob Hall refuses to abandon him.
You know, Rob is the consummate guide. I can't imagine him leaving a client, even if it's obvious that it's going to be suicidal to stay. That's the kind of, it's just something that you don't see that much these days, but that's Rob.
Not far away, Scott Fisher's old friend and climbing partner, Lobsong, tries to rescue him. Just as Lobsong had towed Sandy Pittman up the mountain, now he tries to drag Fisher back down.
When I tied him with the rope and started dragging him, I thought, if I die now, I'll die for my friend. But the weather was so bad, and he couldn't move at all.
Descending into the storm, Neil Beidelman works feverishly to keep the exhausted clients moving, even dragging a 47-year-old Japanese woman named Yasuko Namba.
I got in front of her and I grabbed her harness and I clipped myself into the rope and I started running down, getting her sliding.
Until finally, by nightfall, he has pulled together a group of 7, including Beck Weathers, Charlotte Fox and her boyfriend Tim Madsen, and Sandy Pittman. All of them out of bottled oxygen, out of energy, and in the middle of a freezing hurricane, completely lost.
Sandy basically became hysterical, and I can understand that, you know, say, I don't want to die, I don't want to die, I don't want to die. You know, my face is freezing, my hands are freezing.
As the wind chill drops to 70 below, they pound each other on the back and yell to stay warm.
I wasn't so sure I could make it through a whole night of that. And I thought, well, maybe this is it, old girl. You've had a good life, no regrets.
Then at midnight, 24 hours after they had first set out, one small piece of luck. For just a moment, the cloud cover breaks.
As we looked up, I remember seeing almost directly above me and behind me a bit the Big Dipper. And I was like, yes, there's stars, look.
At last, Beidelman had his bearings. But most of the others were too weak to walk now, and he had to leave them. Tim Madsen stayed behind to help, though there wasn't much he could do.
Beck begins to stand up like this, and then the wind just blows him over backwards. And he rolled out of sight, and that was pretty much the last I had seen of him.
And I can feel myself getting really numb, and that your thoughts are real hard to stay focused anymore, and you're not moving as much, and you just sort of slide off into oblivion.
They are dying. Their only hope, Neil Beidelman. It's the dark, early morning hours of May 11th. As the storm on Mount Everest intensifies, Neil Beidelman, who had stayed too long at the summit waiting for his boss, Scott Fisher, is leading some survivors down the mountain.
I remember stumbling along, and through this ground blizzard, I saw this dim, foggy light, and as we got closer, I remember Anatoly yelling my name, Neil, and I was just like, yes, you know, this is it.
Beidelman has found Camp 4, and Anatoly Bokriev, Scott Fisher's Russian guide, one of the strongest climbers in the world.
Anatoly went out alone into the storm 3 times and brought back people who would almost certainly have died without his effort.
I need to help for people who have sense of life.
Anatoly Bokreev had saved 3 climbers' lives, including Charlotte Fox and Sandy Pittman. But Dr. Beck Weathers and Japanese climber Yasuko Namba are unconscious and beyond his help. They are left to die. Daylight, May 11th. Rob Hall and his client Doug Henson are somewhere near the south summit. Scott Fisher lies some 1,800 vertical feet below. Beck Weathers and Yasuko Namba are only 300 yards from the tents at Camp 4.
Camp 4 is chaos. The wind's blowing so loud you can't talk from one tent to the other. No one really has a plan. And then from then on, the nightmare just intensified.
Exhausted survivors venture out to check the bodies of Weathers and Namba. They do find them. Incredibly, they are alive, but unconscious and barely breathing. No climber has the strength to drag them to the tents. And so, for the second time, a difficult decision is made.
Leave them there, put them out, it's the best thing for everybody. They'll die within minutes, maybe hours at most. They're not feeling any pain.
Hours later, rescuers from down the mountain finally reached the survivors at Camp 4.
We saw about 20 tents in a very small area, and no one was out moving around. So our basic goal really at that point was to cut open the bag and start passing out oxygen.
What the rescuers could not know is that only 300 yards from the tents, one man is still stubbornly refusing to die.
The point that I woke up, my motivations were pretty clear. I mean, I could, sit there and see my family in front of me. And I wasn't going to give up.
Somehow, frozen to the bone, without oxygen, still partially blind, Beck Weathers pictures his family in his mind, throws off his pack, and drags himself up from the snow. At the tents, Todd Burleson looks out and sees something.
He was just a ghost standing there. His arm was frozen up parallel to his shoulder, about like this. His arm was bare to here. His shirt was completely open down to here. And he was unrecognizable. His face was so badly frozen.
All I knew was that as long as my legs would run and I could stand up, I was going to move toward that camp, and if I fell down, I was going to get up. And if I fell down again, I was going to get up. And I was going to keep moving until I either hit that camp, I couldn't get up at all, or I walked off the face of that mountain.
The only thing that saved Beck Weathers' life was the sun. The sun came out, and there was enough radiation, heat from the sun to warm him up, enough to the point where he went from irreversible hypothermia and inevitable death to the point where he could actually function again.
On the second day of the storm, the winds are still howling. The temperature's far below zero. Yet somewhere near the south summit, team leader Rob Hall is alive and talking on his radio to his old climbing partner, Ed Viesters.
We're glad to hear your voice. You're sounding great. Keep moving, buddy. Is your oxygen flowing now?
Yeah, I've got oxygen on.
Good. Crank it up for the uphill parts and start moving it out. Let's go.
And I was speaking to Rob throughout the morning, trying to coerce him or motivate him or stimulate him or somehow get him moving.
Doug Hansen, the client Rob stayed behind to save, is now dead. And on the radio, Viesters is desperate to get Rob to save himself while he can.
Only take what you need, Rob. Only take what you need and start moving.
Okay.
Just crawl and pull your way up the rope.
I was choked up half the time, knowing that he was just sitting there, and at some points we were trying to be angry with him, just say, Rob, get your butt up and move.
Halfway around the world, in New Zealand, Rob's wife, Jan Arnold, 7 months pregnant, gets a phone call from Mount Everest. The base camp satellite phone is patched through to Rob's radio, and she hears his voice.
He was frostbitten, he was weak, he was very tired, but that he was going to try and use the oxygen in the place where he'd spent the night, and he was going to try to come down.
And for 3 hours we thought he was actually moving, on the move. And 3 hours later, he says, you know, I haven't even started yet.
Rob had been up there too long. He had run out of oxygen. Hypoxia and hypothermia worked together to render him incapable of moving after a certain point.
As the storm continues to rage, 40-year-old team leader Scott Fisher is still missing. A rescue team climbs out into life-threatening conditions to find him. Hours later, they report back. Scott is dead. May 11th, 1996. The storm on Mount Everest is claiming lives and now is threatening one of the most experienced guides, Rob Hall. A second rescue party fails to reach him in the storm, and the terrible news is radioed down the mountain.
David yelled up to me, and he said, the Sherpas have turned around, and they can't get to Rob.
It is 6:40 in the evening. Rob Hall's radio is patched through again to his home in New Zealand and his wife, Jan Arnold. It is a call heard on radios across all the camps on Mount Everest.
He's trying to put a good face on it. I mean, this guy's freezing to death, and he's trying to not worry his wife. And she ends by saying, you know, I'm really sending all my positive energy your way. Don't worry, my love. I'll take care of when you get back. And Rob, you know, he's still, oh, I'm sending all my positive energy your way. You know, sleep well. I hope you're comfortable. And
what was it like listening to that conversation?
It was heartbreaking. I mean,
he told me on the final radio phone call that not to worry about him too much.
With all hope now gone, husband and wife talk about their unborn child.
We sort of picked a name as well. I really take comfort in that I have his child, and that I know that he would have, as he drifted off to hypothermic sleep, unconsciousness, that he would have known all of that. It's so great, you know, it's a great comfort to me.
Dawn on the third day. Rob Hall's radio has been silent through the night. It is ironic, with both expedition leaders dead on the mountain. It is a 50-year-old amateur climber, Beck Weathers, who had saved himself. Yet Weathers is in critical condition.
And I see John Krakauer stick his head in the tent, and he had a rather amazed look on his face. I remember exactly what he said to me, but it was not complimentary as to how good I looked at the moment.
his face is really swollen. Couldn't recognize him. His nose is black, his cheeks are black. His hand is the color of porcelain.
The reason the tissues turn black after a while is that they no longer have any blood supply. And any tissue without blood supply will turn black.
I've never been around anything close to death. And here's a guy who's been given up for dead twice, and I have no question he's going to die. We're not going to get him down.
At 26,000 feet, with oxygen so thin, one man cannot physically carry another. To survive, Weathers must stand up and walk, no matter how badly injured. These photographs document Weathers' descent, his hands frozen and unfeeling. A team of rescuers, now joined by David Brashears and Ed Beasters, guide him, slipping, sliding, inch by inch, down the mountain, out of the death zone.
I'm not worried at this point. You may talk about the dream team in basketball, but so I'll match these guys against anybody in the world on mountain climbing.
And he said, I'm going to lose my hands, but I got my family, and I'm thankful to be alive. And he kept saying it. And he said to me, David, you keep talking to me because it takes my mind off my problems.
But Beck Weathers is still far from safety. In a medical tent at Camp 2, he joins the Taiwanese team leader, Makalu Gao. Both men are in desperate need of medical attention. A helicopter rescue seems out of the question because at that altitude, choppers can lose lift and fall from the sky. But back in Dallas, Peach Weathers is on the phone, frantically trying to look for a helicopter anyway.
What can we do to help? Surely we can do something to help get back off that mountain.
This is the man who would attempt the impossible. Nepalese Army pilot, Colonel Madan KC. Within hours of receiving the call, Colonel KC takes off from Kathmandu, flying first to base camp and then higher up the mountain, higher than any small helicopter has ever flown before. Below him, climbers scramble to prepare a landing zone, using Kool-Aid to mark an X in the snow.
He came in and circled, and we thought he was going to give up. And he came around again. I guided him in. He put that helicopter right down on that X, gave me the thumbs up.
I give the thumbs up, okay signal to them, and the one of the climbers, he came close to the helicopters, and he opened the door, and I asked just one person at a time.
The helicopter has been brought in to rescue Beck Weathers, but Makalu Gao, the climber from Taiwan, is in worse condition. Only one can go, and Beck gives up his ride.
It seemed like the thing to do at the time. When that helicopter took off with Makalu in it, though, I must tell you, my spirits were down around my feet, because I didn't think he was coming back.
A freelance cameraman captures the helicopter as it flew overhead.
I came down to the base camp, I dropped in there, and I went up again to the Camp 1, where I was landed before. When they saw me again, and they were more excited.
No one more than Beck Weathers. Within minutes, he is lifted aboard.
He just leans the thing forward, and you just drop, plummet down as you're dropping to gain some air underneath those blades so you can get some lift. Colonel Madan KC, that's a guy with a big heart. And, you know, so I am extraordinarily grateful to him and for his courage.
8 climbers died in the storm on Everest. Their bodies remain where they fell. 3 Indian military climbers on the other side of the mountain. Andy Harris, a guide from New Zealand. Japanese climber Yasuko Namba. Doug Hansen, the postal worker from Seattle, who finally summited on this, his 3rd attempt. Scott Fisher, the team leader, elite climber, and father of 2. Rob Hall, the most respected and experienced guide on Everest, and father-to-be. A quiet memorial service is held at base camp. Friends pay tribute to the dead and begin to question how things could have gone so terribly wrong.
All of us who are there should be looking into our souls pretty damn deep. People pay with their lives, so you better expect that you're going to pay a little anguish for a while.
I was frightened by the deaths of Rob and Scott, and I felt very mortal, and I felt very humble, and I felt very tired.
See that?
But for David Brashears and his film team, the expedition is not yet over. The challenge of Mount Everest has drawn adventurers to its peaks for decades. It got started back in 1920, when Tibet opened the mountain up to foreigners. British explorers George Mallory and Andrew Irvine were the first Westerners to explore Everest, and in June 1924, the first foreigners to die there. Mallory's body was discovered 75 years later, frozen in time. Sir Edmund Hillary and his Sherpa guide Tenzing Norgay made history in May 1953, the first climbers to reach the summit and get back alive. Mallory, Hillary, and most climbers who followed them used this route up the south face. It has killed more people than any other route, simply because it's the road most traveled. In that tragedy of May 1996, 8 climbers died along this route, most of them between the summit and the Khumbu icefall. But those who feel compelled to challenge that death zone on Everest keep coming. Some of them have a job to do. 1 week after the climbing tragedy in 1996, the McGillivray Freeman camera crew headed back up through the Khumbu icefall to finish their IMAX film, Everest, Directed by David Brashears, it has become an IMAX classic.
We had a sense of a mission. We'd worked so hard. I think the group thought it would be senseless to turn around and go home.
In New Zealand, a few months after the tragedy on Everest, the wife of Rob Hall, the most experienced guide to die on Everest, gave birth to a baby girl. As they had agreed in their final conversation, she was named Sarah Hall.
Without her, I'm not quite sure what I would be doing right now. She's a dear little girl and she looks strikingly like him.
In Dallas, Texas, Dr. Beck Weathers, who returned home so terribly wounded, has refocused his life on family and recovery.
It's easy to become obsessed with goals. Because of those obsessions, I took away a lot of good years from my family. I'd like to give those back.
There have been 8 operations, the amputation of his right hand and the fingers of his left, long hours of rehabilitation, and the complete rebuilding of his nose, using cartilage taken from his ears. After all this, Beck has returned to work full-time as a pathologist. He is refusing further cosmetic surgery to smooth his scars.
Each day as I get up and look at that face in the mirror, I want to be able to see those scars, and I want to be able to be reminded of the lessons that I learned.
On an evening in February 1997, Beck is reunited with Colonel Mudden Casey, the helicopter pilot who rescued him.
Hi, Beck.
My goodness, how are you doing?
It was a chance to say thanks and pay tribute to the man who risked his own life to rescue others and who earned an international award for heroism. Director David Brashears went back to Everest to make another film.
That's the 500.
Ed Viesters, who tried so desperately to talk his friend Rob Hall down off the mountain, also went back to climb Mount Everest again. Todd Burleson, who helped rescue the stricken climbers in 1996, for a while at least, went back to guiding clients up Everest. Lobsang will not be back. He was killed by an avalanche in the fall of 1996. He was 25. Veteran climber Anatoly Bokriev was also killed in an avalanche in Nepal on Christmas Day 1997. John Krakauer says he will never return to Everest. His book on the tragedy, Into Thin Air, became a bestseller. And he has a message for anyone who is thinking about climbing up to the death zone on Mount Everest.
You want to go climb Everest? Talk to me. Talk to Scott Fisher's wife. Talk to Doug Hansen's kids. I wish I hadn't gone. It was a huge mistake that will affect me for the rest of my life.
Despite the deaths and hardships on Everest, it still seems to be the ultimate call to the spirit of adventure in us. And every year, hundreds of us challenge the mountain during the spring climbing season, creating the Everest traffic jam. Climbers say, as long as we're human and the mountain is there, that's the way it will be.